Your readings for this week examine the toxic legacies of industrial society from a variety of perspectives. The article by Dietrich examines local-level power dynamics involving government officials, corporate representatives, regional NGO advocates, and members of a community polluted by pharmaceutical production. When communities seek redress for exposure to toxic pollution, it's increasingly common for corporations and some government agencies to push for approaches to dispute resolution that they see as less adversarial alternatives to litigation in the courts. One such alternative approach is known as stakeholder dialogue. Dietrich argues that stakeholder dialogue is structurally disadvantageous for community members. This approach, she shows, places a premium on maintaining an appearance of harmony and thus marginalizes the most vocal members of the affected community. It also assumes that all participants participate in the dialogue as equals, thus obscuring profound differences of power among the parties. Dietrich extends the concept of regulatory capture so that it describes not just the conflict of interest between industry and regulators, but the unthinking acceptance of stakeholder dialogue and other approaches that favor corporate interests over others. Dietrich thus urges scholars who work in polluted communities to resist the temptation to help facilitate such approaches, urging us instead to push for more explicit attention to power dynamics and marginalized voices. As you read this article, pay close attention to Dietrich's terminology. How does she use the concepts of regulatory capture, coercive harmony, and hegemony? Can you think of ways of applying these concepts to other cases or contexts? Like Dietrich, the article by MAGEE uses political ecology to connect a seemingly local environmental problem to political, economic, and environmental processes unfolding at the global scale. Specifically, MAGEE seeks to challenge the notion that widespread environmental degradation and toxic pollution in China is somehow a local or even national issue. Rather, MAGEE shows, environmental problems in China are connected to the manufacturing, consumption, and disposal of commodities on a global scale. His account posits a direct link between the behaviors of consumers in countries like the U.S. and the experiences of people living with toxic pollution in China. MAGEE also discusses some of the ways in which China's experience of industrialization has been distinct. For example, it has been much more rapid and shaped by a number of policies and concepts that are particular to China. In what ways does MAGEE help us to move beyond simplistic narratives about the causes of extreme pollution in China? Based on MAGEE's argument, where would we look for solutions to this problem? Examining another dimension of global pollution, the chapter by Sende explores the international trade in toxic waste. As the global volume of toxic waste has increased, so too has awareness of its short and long-term effects on people's health. In the U.S., Europe, and other highly industrialized countries, communities have demanded stricter regulation of the placement and processing of toxic waste. One unintended consequence of their efforts is that some governments have increasingly looked to export toxic waste to countries with less stringent regulations. Observers of this trend have deemed it a form of toxic terrorism. The 1989 Basel Convention made it illegal for wealthy governments and corporations to export toxic waste abroad, but without a robust enforcement apparatus, this has simply pushed more of the trade underground. In her essay, Sende calls for strengthening the policies and institutions responsible for regulating the international waste trade. Do you think her recommendations are sufficient? Why or why not? Your final two readings about the history of environmental justice activism in North Carolina and the legacies of the Bhopal disaster offer two further examples of the many forms that toxic pollution takes around the world. Scholars have used the term slow violence to describe the long-term consequences of toxic pollution. Does that concept seem apt for describing the experiences of people in places like Warren County and Bhopal? I look forward to discussing these and other questions with you.